You have 24 hours before your exam and you are freaking out right now. June, I promised myself that I wouldn't procrastinate. I promised you I wouldn't procrastinate. But yeah, I did again. And I can't afford another bad grade. I really need to do well in this exam, but I only got 24 hours. What do I possibly do? Well, I got you. I'm gonna tell you exactly what I've done in the past because the truth of the matter is I've experienced that too. Yes, I'm a Dean's List biomedical engineering student, getting both my bachelor's and my master's at the same time with a neuroengineering concentration. I've had a lot of academic success, but it doesn't mean I didn't experience what you're going through because the truth of the matter is life gets in the way. So whether it's a fault of our own or whether it's just something that happened to us, sometimes we find ourselves in these circumstances, and I want you to be able to save this video and come back to it every time that it happens to you. Hopefully it's not too many times though. We're gonna get right into it. The truth is you got 24 hours. The last thing you wanna do is hear a long intro. My name is June Yu. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up, give it a comment, and subscribe. But let's get immediately into it. Step number one. Prioritize your study material. You're going to be doing this in really three specific ways. The first way is to identify your weaknesses. And if you followed my content for long enough, you know I talk about my learning system. And I think that this learning system is something that you should have adopted by now. But this is exactly why you should have done it, because it would have helped you in this current moment. I just have to quickly interrupt for a very important piece of information. I just got off the phone while I was editing this and I need to share this with you right away. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited to say that we are officially back. Next week, limited release, and it's going to be available for immediate dispatch. This is my learning system. It's one that I cannot tell you how much time and effort went into making this. Learning system is one that I've talked a lot about across all my platforms. It's the one that I've been utilizing and I attribute a lot of my success to the last 4 years of my biomedical engineering degrees. And now I've seen this help thousands of you in your classrooms. I've seen videos and pictures of it, and it's the most surreal experience ever on my end. And I'm just so happy that I can help you guys with this book. And I've been working extremely hard to make a restock possible. And it's not always the easiest thing to do, but the fact that the time is here and it's next week is the coolest thing ever. So what I want you to do is put your email into the link that I have in the description box below, and you're just going to be a part of the wait list so that I can email you directly when the books go live next week so that you don't miss out on your chance to snag one because I assume that they're going to go really quickly. So yeah, I'm so excited, but let's return to the rest of the video. So we've talked about priming is what you do before class. We talked about what you do during class, but this third stage is where all of your time there would have saved you time here, okay? So those post-class immediate reviews, that's when you're looking at the active recall questions you create during class, you practice them, and then you reflect on your strengths and weaknesses. Why do you do this? So because if you find yourself in circumstances like this, you know exactly where to focus your material on. You know what your weaknesses are, and you know to spend majority of your time there. Because if it's a strength of yours, you probably just need to freshen up on it more than actually spending large chunks of time on it. So if you followed my content, if you know the learning system, then great, you're already settled on this part. But if you haven't done that just yet, I still urge you to take about 30 minutes to do this, okay? So obviously it won't be as accurate or as in-depth as if you had done it along the process before your exam with the learning system, but here what you should do is grab your syllabus, look at the topics that have been covered leading up to your exam, and try to figure out areas in which you remember pretty well and the things that are going to be your weaknesses that you should spend more time on. The second way you're going to scope down your material is by speaking to your friends. If your friends have been keeping up with the material, right, and they understand the material and they know what's going to be on it, and because they've shown up to every single class and maybe you haven't, they've heard the little remarks by your professors that said, hey, this is going to be on the exam, so make sure you know this. It's important to speak to them, right? It's important to gather information from your close group at school, people that you trust, you know, other good students, and see if your professor had hinted at any content emphasis that you might have missed upon, or you want to just speak to your friends in case that they know that some parts of it are harder than other parts and they can let you know of it now. So that's the second way of doing it. The third way you're going to be doing it is looking at past papers, right? So past papers, you have to be careful here, right? So I think what people do is they have this over dependency on past papers, and that's not what you want, because the truth of the matter is your past paper isn't going to be your exam. especially if you get into higher education, right? So maybe if you are starting out and your professors are really kind, that they'll give you a very similar exam. But in my case, that's like never the case. But it's helpful to think about certain content emphasis that you'll get while looking at past papers, right? Even if the questions aren't going to be similar. And so that's another great way to do that. So you got 3 ways there that you're going to be scoping the material that you're going to be studying. Again, the whole idea here is knowing that you have a very limited span of time. You want to be ensuring that you're using that to the best of your ability. So make sure you follow this first stage. The second step, make a document. However you want to do this, whether it be a Google Doc, whether it be just a notebook piece of paper, whether it be an Excel sheet, however you think that this is going to work well for you. And now that you've scoped down the material, create a list of that material and start to color code them, right? So based on how comfortable you feel recalling that information. So what I use personally is a green, yellow, and then red system. So green means I recall the information sufficiently. Yellow means that I recall it adequately, that there's some areas for improvement. And then red just means that I don't know the material at all. But this is a great way to keep track of it. But the reason why I'm telling you to create a document for this is because as you start studying the material, what I want you to do is actually on that same document next to the topic or next to the concept, start to write important parts of it, right? If there's certain weaknesses or if there's certain really repeated things that you know are probably going to be on the exam, you should just write them on that document. Why? Because it's going to be a perfect cheat sheet for you. And we'll talk about this later on in the steps. But during exam day, you can immediately review that. You can have assurance that, okay, here's all of the things that I know that I should probably focus upon. And then I have that sheet. I can go through it really quickly right before exam. That'll help reduce anxiety. And it's just a great way to do like last minute studying on the day of. So take this seriously, right? So create that document. You probably already created some sort of document while trying to scope down your study material. Now that you have it, create a digital or a physical version of it, and then have space to write down next to it some things that you want to notate as you go through the process of actually studying it. Step 3, create a study schedule. I know probably what you're thinking about right now. Again, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out, I'm panicking, I should just get right into studying the material. But trust me, these first 3 stages are extremely important because you're setting yourself up for success, right? So that when you are studying the material and you get into that, it's meaningful, you're doing it in a time efficient and effective manner. So this part also shouldn't take you long, but it's important that you do this before you get into the material, and that's creating a schedule for yourself. So what I usually recommend is about 45 minutes per weakness. Now that's obviously dependent on how quickly you're able to absorb that information. It has to do with what concepts you're talking about, what subject you're talking about. But usually 45 minutes is a great focus number because 45 minutes is usually long enough to enter a flow state and not too long where you're bogged down by distractions. And then you should have 5-minute breaks that break it up, right? Between your studying and then into your next study session. You should have breaks. Always include breaks. I know that you're tempted to just study like 8 hours straight, but trust me, the efficiency decreases dramatically, and you want to be ensuring that you're making the most out of each weakness study session. And by doing the breaks in between them, it's a great opportunity for you to recover your focus, your energy, and then be able to really tackle the next bout as effectively as possible. I think another important part about these breaks, though, is that they don't have to be just these 5-minute breaks that you're embedding, but they can be also in junction with, let's say, you getting ready for bed, right? Like you getting ready to bed, it's probably gonna take 15 minutes for you to wash up. Like that should be integrated within your study schedule, so that counts for a break. When you go and eat dinner, which you absolutely should do, you should eat food, you should also include that as part of your break. And so create this study schedule where you have about 45 minutes per these weaknesses or these concepts, and then go ahead and integrate these 5-minute breaks or also additional breaks in between with your eating. I also think you should have some movement in your breaks, so be active sometimes so you don't want to fall asleep, obviously. I think that's a great basis to have in terms of a study schedule. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but then of course ensure that you're spending some time right before you go to bed reviewing your strengths as well. So majority of this time is going to be focused on your weaknesses, but of course, we're gonna freshen up on our strengths as well at the end. Step number 4, I believe it is, make use of your friends here again, okay? So what I mean by this is your friends, if they've stayed up on top of the material up to this point in time, and they have their own strengths, they might be able to explain to you some of them in a manner in which it is easy for you to comprehend, where they remove the fluff of the textbook source, or whether it be a lecture that you might be tempted to look at. But if your friend already knows the material pretty well, you should go ahead and just listen to them as they reduce the fluff, and then just tell you the meat of the content that's of importance. Now, obviously, in most cases, I tend to tell you guys to not just take that at face value of what your friends tell you, because your friend's ability to comprehend information doesn't guarantee that they know everything that you need to know. And that's why you should always double check with it. But at this point, you're running out of time, right? So a great way to be efficient with this is make use of your friends. I definitely don't think you should spend the majority of your time doing a study group for the remainder of the 24 hours, just because it can be very distracting if you don't have the right type of people around you. But if you got those few select friends where you know that they are really smart, or that they're always on top of their material, then go ahead and call them, give them like a 10-15 minute call, and try to figure out, hey, are there certain concepts here that you could explain to me in a way that's easy for you to understand? And it's like a double win, because they're practicing basically the Feynman technique. You're trying to understand the material. Great, it's a win-win. Make use of your friends. It's a great opportunity for you to do that. Step number 5, find a focus space. Man, this is so important, because you got to find a space here now with this remaining time that's so limited, that you are not being bogged down by distractions, okay? So if you are in a household that's really loud, I've experienced that growing up. Maybe you don't study in your house, right? Maybe you go out to a library, or you go to a friend's house, or you find a different environment that's gonna be quieter. Now, if you're forced to work inside the house still, I have a perfect option for you. Hopefully you have some sort of noise canceling headphones. If not, I use these it's like a few dollars on Amazon, just these earplugs. They do a pretty darn good job of blocking out a lot of the noise. I'll have a divider. I used this growing up. So I literally bought one of those cardboard dividers. And it's so important that you do that, because people fail to understand that your mental focus usually follows your visual focus. So if you're visually distracted, you'll be mentally distracted as well. So a divider does a really good job of eliminating those potential distractions visually, and allowing you to really focus on the material in front of you, or your pieces of paper, or your computer, whatever it is. So I think a divider is a really great idea, especially if you're in a busy, chaotic space. So you have your earplugs, you have your headphones, you have your divider, and the next one that you should have is a timer. So this timer is really cool. Basically, it's like a gravity timer. You have like 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you'll literally flip it, and it'll give you the time. And I love this. I think you should always have a timer on you, because if you're going to be sticking to your schedule, you want to be ensuring that all your breaks are taken at the reasonable time. You're taking the amount of breaks that you should be having. You should be studying for those 45 minutes, or whatever you determine is effective for you. A timer is a really important thing to have here, right? Another thing that you should have, snacks. So you should have your dinners, and you should allocate time for that. And I don't think you should be eating your dinner while studying, just because I think that's like a very stressful thing to do. Like if you're going to eat dinner, just give yourself like 15-20 minutes to eat the dinner, and then come back. But throughout, you might be hungry. So have snacks that are not going to be sticky on your fingers. Have some nuts, have some fruit, but make sure you got some like forks and stuff, so again, your hands aren't sticky. You got to go wash your hands. But you should have snacks there for you, so that when you get hungry throughout it, you can continue to feed yourself, and you can continue to sustain that level of energy without needing to get up and go to the kitchen and again interfere with your focus. So if you have that in front of you, you're going to be well suited in terms of your workspace to optimize for the most amount of success. This is crucial. You don't want to be bogged down by distraction. It's only going to grow in frustration if you got your door open, people are coming in, you're going to get mad at the people coming in trying to distract you. You're going to turn off all your notifications on your phone. You're going to lock in. You got a little bit of time left. Let's make sure that this time is focused and it really counts. Step number 6, we are going to be using active techniques for our revision. There are 4 ways that I'm going to be discussing about how you can do this. The reason why you want to stay away from passive techniques is because 1, they're low utility. 2, they take up a lot of time. So when we're talking about like rereading something, rewriting something, this isn't the time for it. I don't think there's really much of a time for it. I think passive techniques can kind of go in the dumpster. I think sometimes passive techniques can have a space, but definitely not now when you are really limited on your bandwidth. You should be utilizing active techniques. So let's go through them. Before I go through them, let's talk about what active techniques really are. So it's a great way to accurately assess your knowledge, as you are constantly testing yourself without without the source material in front of you. That's like the most basic answer I could possibly give you. But passive is like when you are looking at the material in front of you, rewriting it, rereading it, all that stuff. But what you want to be doing is assessing your knowledge, and actually forcing yourself to retrieve the information without the source material in front of you is really, really important for understanding and retaining. So a lot of times we focus on what can we put into our brains, like what can we shove into our brains, but it's just as important. In research has shown that it's also as important that you pull that information out with these active recall applications. Cool. Now that we're on the same page, let's talk about some of the ones that I would encourage. So I think the blurting method is fantastic. So the blurting method is you find what source you will be reading, you'll make it into a logical chunk for you, and then you'll close the source, and on a piece of paper, you will blurt out, you will write out everything that you recall from it. So again, just a simple way to accurately test for your knowledge. Now, obviously, you're gonna have areas in which you don't remember. Great, you found areas to target for your further revision, right? Now the areas that you did recognize and the areas you were able to recall accurately, great. Now that's become a strength of yours. And this is where you can start to change those colors on the document from maybe red to yellow to green eventually. So the blurting method I think is a fantastic option. If we're talking about the next one that I would encourage you to utilize is the Feynman technique. So the Feynman technique, it's funny, I spoke about this earlier, but maybe I should have explained what the Feynman technique was then. It's your ability to explain a concept almost as if you were speaking to a fifth grader, right? So when I say that to you though, you might be thinking, oh, I just have to simplify the information. I just have to make it really, really baby termed. I just got to use really simple words. But that's like half of the task here. It's also about making sure that the information is accurate too, right? And a great way to supplement your explanations are with analogies and examples, and that will further require you to deeply understand the information first, and then you'll speak it aloud and try to practice with it. So a great tip I got for it, if you just want to start out simple, literally just get your teddy bears out, get your, I don't know, whatever. Just imagine you have a friend, get your pillows out and speak to them like they're the individual that you're trying to explain the concepts to. I think probably better alternatives here, especially as you're running out of time, are one, if you can do this with a friend, if you can try and explain to them certain concepts and they can correct you on areas, that's ideal, because that immediate feedback that you get is going to serve you well. So sometimes you might think that you are simplifying and being accurate with a concept, but then your friend will be like, yeah, actually, I don't think that you understood that correctly. Like, this is what I think the explanation should be like. That's a great way to get immediate feedback. But if you don't have a friend around you, what I do all the time is I will literally record myself on my Mac and try to explain it. The reason is because I'll listen to that back in 2x speed, and I will do that self-assessment for myself. So the Feynman technique is great. And the third way that you can do this are with practice tests. And I think this is probably the best way to do this as you're running out of time. Again, it had already scoped out the content for you. And as you've done the blurting and the Feynman techniques for some of the areas that might have not been covered exactly on that past paper, now it's your time to do that past paper, right? It's your time to go through the process of answering these questions. And what I encourage you to do though is when you are going through the past papers, not just figuring out the right answers, but truly questioning if you understand the material, right? Like if you're going to go through the past paper, make use of that. So in other words, this is what I see a lot of times. It's like you'll take a guess and then you'll look at the answers right away and you'll think, yeah, that's kind of what I meant. I know that material. And then you go to the next one and then you'll do that constantly. But in reality, you probably didn't know that material, and most likely that question is going to be reframed differently on the exam. And if you don't know the material, you're probably not going to do well on the exam question. So be sure that you are really challenging yourself to provide thorough answers, even if it's a multiple choice question. Like actually explain or write down why those answers you think are correct before looking at the answer sheet, but also take the time to think about the other answers and why they are wrong, and just consider different applications in which that question could potentially be asked in. This is really helpful, right? So this is your opportunity to really test yourself with these past paper questions. But again, it's only effective if the intention behind it, if the process that you're applying is effective. So utilize this in terms of my advice. And if you're going to use practice papers, which I think you should, approach it in that manner with a lot of intention. So if those are the three main ways that you are going to be using active recall, I think the fourth one that most people tend to skip out on that I think can be really helpful are different ways of learning an information, right? Or different ways of viewing a piece of information. So I think visual aids and mnemonics are great opportunities for you as well, just because at the very least, they break up the monotony of sometimes just trying to do the same type of revision. Instead, when you can view knowledge with mnemonics or you can view knowledge with a visual diagram, I think can be really beneficial. I think diagrams are probably what I would recommend the most. I think mnemonics have their place, but I think depending on what subject and depending on what topic, it might be hard to come up with these mnemonics, and you coming up with a mnemonic might actually take more time than you just learning the material. But when you are talking about these visual diagrams, they can go a really long way. So as you are starting to understand some of these concepts, right? Like you've created a list of these important concepts that are going to be covered on the exam already. If you look at them and you start to group them and you start to create relationships between them, it's your opportunity to really see the big picture understanding of everything and how things start to interconnect. What do I mean by this? Well, it's like, I don't want you guys to fixate so much on these individual components, because just because you know individual topics doesn't mean that you're going to have the skill to synthesize them in real time on the exam. And that's how most exam questions are when you get into higher education, right? They're inferential. They're not going to be ones that require you to regurgitate a piece of information. When you get into higher education, it's all about trying to synthesize new knowledge with what you do know. It's about contextualizing. It's about comparing, contrasting. And that requires an ability to understand how these concepts link together. So diagrams are a great way to visually represent this. So I urge you to try this yourself. So we talked about the blurting method, the Feynman technique. We talked about using practice tests, but using them effectively. And now we've talked about visual diagrams and potentially utilizing mnemonics as well. Step 7, sleep. As obvious as this might sound, I also know that you're probably tempted to not do this, even though you know it's obvious. Don't pull an all-nighter. I'm going to be a hypocrite if I said that I never pulled an all-nighter before, but it's so ineffective because you have to understand the way that neuroplasticity works. Your ability to consolidate information and to be able to retain it depends a lot on deep rest, and that's usually your sleep that happens that night. So absolutely sleep, okay? You should account for in your schedule an opportunity for you to sleep enough, all right? So you're probably not gonna be able to sleep like your 8-9 hours. If you can, fantastic. But if you are really in a crunch and you're talking about these really, really complex classes, you might have to sacrifice an hour or two, but you do want to make sure that you're getting quality sleep so that you're able to have that neuroplasticity happen. You're able to also think about your performance, right? We know that when we are drowsy, we're not performing at the level that we should be performing at. So you're better off, like, even if you don't necessarily review every piece of individual information, I would actually advise you to sleep, then try to spend another 3 hours looking at that information individually. Why am I saying this? Well, because I just talked to you about the importance of a diagram and understanding how information links together. The reason why you do that too is because sometimes when you have such an interconnected web and you understand why things are linked together and how things are linked together, then you can actually fill in the gaps a lot of times. Even if you don't know the individual material at its depth, you understand how it works in relation to the other pieces of information. That's why that diagram is so essential. And so that's why I would recommend that you would just sleep, because if you can sleep and you have the higher performance the next day, you're going to be able to challenge your brain to be able to look at those gaps of knowledge and fill them in yourself in real time under that pressure. Trust me, I think that it's hard to convince somebody to sleep when they are trying to pull an all-nighter. But if you have organized your time in an effective and efficient manner so that you're covering your weaknesses, you're taking time to freshen up on your strengths, if you've done those first 3 steps already, then most likely you would have been able to manage that time so that you can go to sleep at a reasonable hour. So make sure you sleep, okay? Step number 8, I'm gonna talk about an all-encompass what you can do on your exam day. So you've gone through the part of revising, you've done a lot of the hard work at this point, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be optimizing the day of, and there are ways to do this. The first is to make sure you eat a breakfast, make sure you eat a lunch. I don't know what time your exams are. I take a lot of master's classes, so sometimes my exams are like 8 p.m., right? And so even that gives me time to spread out my study schedule a lot more than if I just had the night before. Hopefully that makes sense. But I am ensuring that I eat all my meals. The last thing that you want to be doing when you're sitting for an exam is hearing your stomach grumble and not having the energy to finish an exam, right? Your performance has a lot to do with the food that you fuel your body with the ability to get a good night's sleep, so don't discount the importance of that. The second part here is to monitor your caffeine intake, especially if you've lost a good amount of sleep. You're going to be tempted to just dose up on caffeine. But the issue is you get that jittery feeling, you're super anxious, and now you have this whole testing anxiety, and then you also have the fact that you didn't sleep and you're dosed up on all this caffeine. So I think caffeine is useful, especially if you're tired, and it can boost your performance, but just monitor how much you're taking, okay? I don't think you should be drinking 2 cold brews. Like, it's probably not going to serve you as well as you would like it to. It's probably going to do a lot more damage, and it's going to do a lot more harm than any good. So just monitor it. But I think consuming it generally is totally fine. Number 3, breathing techniques. I'm not going to go into the ones that I use specifically, but if you go up on YouTube and just search up breathing techniques, there's a lot of guided ones for about like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Weirdly enough, they'll do wonders for you, right? Because what happens a lot of times is we have this tension in our body that goes unnoticed. Like, there's serious tension there, and it influences our behavior, influences our cognitive function. And just releasing some of that tension helps you be more like you. It helps you to actually perform well under that pressure and just be able to recall the information the night prior effectively. So breathing techniques are a great opportunity to do this. But the best part is like they don't take long. And for those that think breathing techniques are weird, like, think about the greatest athletes. Like, you look at Steph Curry, you look at LeBron, you look at your favorite football players. Like, all of them have their breathing techniques that they go through before their games or during their games. It's like the moment is big, but try to ground yourself, try to be mindful of the situation, and so that you're able to perform the way that you want to perform and you don't combust under the pressures of the external situation. So I think that's really important for you to try. Now, the next tip that I'm going to give you for the day of is probably the most important one, and this is going to wrap everything up, and that's to review your cheat sheet of weaknesses, of topics that you knew were going to be a focus, and that's why I told you to do this early on. So now at this point, what you should have is hopefully a list that has a lot of green on it. Obviously, it's probably not going to be the case. You're going to have some yellows, maybe even some reds, but those reds, hopefully you'll be able to fill in the gaps in real time, because you're able to have a great understanding of how the information links, or maybe the information just isn't on the exam and then you've lucked out. But yeah, that's a great cheat sheet for you, because you can immediately look at that and you can refresh through it, and it does a lot of good in terms of reassuring you that you know the material. Because what happens a lot of times right before exams, we're like, our brains are going 1,000 miles per hour because we know the pressure that comes along with an exam, especially if it's like weighted 30% or 50% of your score. So when you go through that paper, you're like, yeah, I do know this material. Yeah, these are all the things that I needed to cover, and I did cover a majority of them. It does a really good job of visually showcasing to yourself that you know what you're doing and that you are as prepared as you possibly could have been. And now I'm going to wrap this all up by saying this. I teach you how to do well in school, right? And I teach you that getting good grades is important, but it's not everything, right? And what I start to see people do is they start to prioritize the grades more than the experience itself, and then it makes the entire journey absolutely miserable. Look, if you can implement the right strategies and you can take your failures for what they are and then be able to change your techniques in real time, it makes the journey a lot more fun. It allows you to control what you can control and then make incremental progress to where you want to be. So even to this day, it's not like I get A's on every single exam. There are some times where I don't perform as well as I would like to, but I take that for what it is. It's like, yeah, that grade is not perfect, but it's also not make it or break it, right? I'm still going to graduate most likely, so I'm not going to put that extreme pressure on myself even if I get a grade that I don't like. But I'm also not going to just ignore it, right? Like, I'm going to say, all right, maybe I don't leave just 24 hours on the clock before this next exam. But I just want to say this as a word of reassurance. If you're watching this video and you're applying these types of techniques, I'm proud of you. I genuinely am. You are ahead of a lot more people than you could imagine. There's a lot of people that just give up altogether. And it's really unfortunate because learning can be a really enjoyable experience if done right. And hopefully these types of tips and techniques that I teach you really embody that. I spoke at like 100 miles per hour in this video, specifically because I know that you only got 24 hours left. So maybe I missed some things, maybe some things were unclear, and I'd be happy to clear it up in the comments below. So please leave your questions there, and I'm more than happy to help. This is just really came from this DM that I just got, and this person was saying like, June, like, I'm freaking out, like, please help me. I created a whole voice message for them. It was about like 20 minutes long. But I was like, this is probably something useful for all of you guys to hear as well. So take it for what it is, utilize it, save it so that you can have more success even if you just got 24 hours left. Give this video a thumbs up if you've learned anything, and of course, subscribe. with that all being said, until next time, please take care of yourselves. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you all at the top.